Hello everybody and welcome back to Solipsis. And today I'm going to be giving you a full teach to prepare you for some gameplay that I'm going to be posting later today with the other designer. So this will be a full in-depth breakdown on how to play the game. And yeah, so it plays at 2 to 4 players. Two is pretty fun. It's a lot faster and you'll have a lot more room to kind of expand around the board, and it also sometimes kind of get into the position where, you know someone's going to win, you can't stop them. But thankfully, the game is pretty quick, and by the time you reach that sort of point, there's only like 1 or 2 turns left, and then the game ends, and that person does win. 3 players is pretty exciting. It's a lot more up close and personal, a lot less space to work with, and there's those fun negotiations of dogpiling on who's closest to winning and then betraying them, and then it's just all sorts of nonsense. It's like a knife fight in a phone booth. And then 4 players, we managed to play it once with 4 people, and nothing blew up, so I guess that counts as it working. So the first thing you're going to do once you know how many players you got is you will determine some way of figuring out who's going first. If I got 2 or 3, I like to just use die, odds, evens, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or you could just have everyone roll, but somehow figure out who is going first. I'll just jump into this seat. And then you give them first player token. And then once you do that, you're going to jump right into building your faction. So you'll grab the deck of Chronos cards and you'll deal each person 3 cards. So I'll grab my 3. Interesting. And then what you're going to do is you're going to figure out which cards you want to take as your past, present, and future. So you'll see on the card here, it tells you what the sections are. So for all of them, the past of your faction is going to determine most of your gameplay. So it's going to give you a unique set of cards, a deck of 12 cards with 4 different ones, and also some additional rules to supplement it. Like, for example, the Old Empire here has rules for the fact that they have 5 strongholds dotted around the map that give them special places they can use powers. You've got the Raptor here, who's very fast at expanding, but anytime you take one of their planets from them, they gain Spite as token on their player board that they can spend to like really screw you over. And then you have the MEB, the Millennium Enforcement Battalions, who are the token human characters, and they actually have a 4th class of ships that their special tokens represent that have all sorts of utilitarian purposes. Then in the second section is the present. Whichever one you take is going to determine your starting space, which is shown on the minimap here as the yellow dot. So that'll be where your homeworld is, where you start the game and you expand from. And it also gives you an affinity, which is a card from this race's kind of set of things. And it's a once per turn ability that you can use. It might be reactionary, or it might add on to one of your actions, but it's not an action in of itself. It just modifies things. And so it's a little way to bring some flavor to your coalition from that other faction. And it actually goes to whoever controls that homeworld. So obviously you're going to start the game controlling your own homeworld, so you'll have your own affinity. But what if one of your opponents takes it from you, they will take your affinity, and now they'll have 2 to possibly complement their faction's playstyle. And then the third one is the future, which is going to determine your win condition. So for example, this one here is to control 2 more systems than each other opponent. Pretty straightforward. Just, have a clear majority of planets. The Raptor here is to control the homeworlds of your past, present, and future. So essentially, in the minimap here, the 3 yellow dots, you got to control those 3 systems, and that's your win. And then the Old Empire is you have to control 8 systems that are all connected. So for example, if you controlled, this is 7, so if you controlled these systems and then like this one, for example, that would count because they're all connected together. But if you had like 3 here and then not this one and then 5 here, that doesn't count because they're not connected. The line is broken over here. So that's pretty straightforward, just to kind of build wide objective. And you'll notice that those win conditions all sound differently easy to do. And that is indicated by the number on the bottom left. This is your priority. So the harder an objective is to complete, the lower its number, and the higher its priority when it comes to breaking ties. So let's say one player had the Meb as their future, and one player had the Old Empire, and they both completed it at the end of the same turn. Well, the Meb here would win because their priority is higher. It's closest to the 0. So that means that theirs was harder to do. So I think for this, I'm going to do this. So everyone would put their Chronos cards face down in front of them on the slots and then flip them over at the same time. There's some other rules for like revealing one at a time, and then you can switch your options. But we'll just say this for now. Then, once that's done and you know everything, everyone is going to grab all the components that they need. So first thing, the pass, that's the biggest. I'm going to go over to the Raptor and grab all their stuff. So I've got a race card, which tells you what their specific rules are and give you a little bit of history on them. And then you've got your deck of 12 action cards. So you can see that there's 12 of them and there's 4 different cards. Give that a quick shuffle. And then just for TTS, I've got a little reference of what each of the 4 are, just in case you need to check for one that you don't have in your hand, or for your opponents, of course. The last one in the box here is the affinity. So as the Raptor with my past, I don't get their affinity. What I'm going to do is go over to the Meb box and grab their affinity. So for as long as I control 70, whenever I win a combat, I get to place 2 power worth of ships in the system of that combat. So a nice little benefit there for winning. And again, this is within my power for as long as I control this system, and then it's once per turn. So when I use it, flip it over, and then end of the turn, flip it back. And if it ever goes neutral somehow, there's 1 or 2 ways that can happen. Then it just gets set aside until somebody reclaims the system. Okay, then the next thing that you're going to do is you will go ahead and grab your starting hand of 5 cards. You won't be using them yet, but what you will be doing is getting your starting systems, and you might want to keep in mind what sort of resource costs you have to dictate where you expand. So first thing I'll do is obviously you take control of your homeworld. That's pretty obvious. And you'll also stick your homeworld token over top of the resource indicator. I'll get into more why you do that, but basically homeworlds always count as wild resources. So any of the 3, so that you get a little bit of flexibility. Then what you do is you'll grab 1 dreadnought, 2 cruisers, and 4 fighters, and you'll set them aside in front of you. So basically each of these 3 stacks is about even in terms of strength. So there's a power rating for different ships, which is the number of shots they take, aka the number of dice you roll when fighting, and also the number of shots it takes to destroy them. So their health. The dreadnoughts are worth 4, cruisers are all worth 2, and fighters are each worth 1. So this is essentially 3 stacks of 4 power each. Then once you've got that in player order, what you're going to do is you're going to choose a system adjacent to one that you control, and you'll take control of it and then place 1 stack of these ships here in it. So for example, I think I will go and take control of Marfair here. It's adjacent, and I will put some fighters there. And this is important because different ship types have different other types that they have advantage against. So dreadnoughts essentially have advantage in combat against cruisers. Cruisers have advantage against fighters, and fighters come all the way back around and have advantage against dreadnoughts. And what this basically translates to is being more likely to get a hit during combat. But I'll get into that at the end when we do combat. So this is important because If, for example, let's say purple, I won't grab their card, but let's say they're starting here, and they obviously control it. It's important to take control of the systems that are in between you, that they might be able to steal from you, that you might want. For example, tech planets, which are the blue ones, are really valuable because that is the resource type that commonly lets you build ships. And while, just sheer might isn't everything, careful planning and movement and placing your ships correctly is important. Having a bigger fleet is always a great thing in terms of winning. So if I wanted to take this tech planet before they had the ability to do so, I would want to go towards them first. And let's say they had already gone and they put a dreadnought here. I might want to put fighters here because fighters will have the advantage. And the other reason is that because these fighters are all different ships, it means that I can move them independently. And because this system actually has the most connections on the entire board, fighters are great here because I can explore and still keep one ship left in the system. Whereas if I had put a dreadnought there, that's one ship that can only go into one other place before leaving the system completely exposed. So let's say that happened. Let's say for whatever reason, instead of going for this planet, they went for Novar here. And they took it with cruisers. Then, when it comes back to my turn, I'll choose a system that is adjacent to any that I already control. So since now I control Marfair here, I can take Carrizo since it's now adjacent. And let's say I'll take it with Dreadnoughts because they're adjacent to Purple's Dreadnought, and I don't want to put the cruisers out there, which will be vulnerable. And then once it's a foregone conclusion, you've got only one ship type left. That's just going to go on your homeworld. Nothing crazy there. So now that you've got the initial settings, initial planets that you control, you will refresh all systems that contain a ship, basically all non-neutral systems. And this is, basically, they're already producing stuff, but it's not really things related to the war effort. You gotta muscle in there and get your ships and force them to start producing stuff that you want, like, weapons and alloys and engines and stuff like that. So only systems that are controlled by another player get resources, which is a way to you can start exploring, but you won't instantly be getting new resources. Now, what do resources do? Well, they are what you spend to take actions in most cases. But that will come up very shortly. So now that you have your initial systems, it's time to get to the first planning phase. So on future turns, this is when you draw back up to 5, but in this case, we already have cards, so we don't. And this is where I'll draw attention to the anatomy of a card. So there's got a couple things you want to pay attention to. First, obviously, you got the name, and very simply, the number here is how many copies of that card you have in your deck. Most of them are 3. Some of them are 4, which means you can always count on having 1 or 2 of those. And some are 2, which are some pretty impactful cards in your deck. And if you do have it, you might want to figure out how you want to play it, because you don't want to just ditch it for a normal action. Now, you'll also have the 2 types of actions it gives you, which are opportunity and planned. And these differ basically in terms of how effective they are. So planned effects are free, but they're not usually as impactful. So they might give you, 1 movement, but they're usually just either persistent effects that take place for the duration of the turn, or the little things related to your faction. But generally, the big things like taking lots of movements or building ships or really impactful things that drive your game forward are going to be opportunity effects, which cost resources. And the resource cost is shown here. So this one, if I want to do the opportunity effect, it's going to cost me 1 green cultural resource. This one would be 1 red military resource. And if I had one to show you, the third would be obviously blue tech resources. Now, how do you spend these resources is you spend them from systems you control that have a resource. So for example, this blue tech planet here, if I wanted, or I guess a better example would be playing Furious Reclaim here. If I wanted to play this card, I would need to control a red military system that had a resource on it. So I could do that like so. And the homeworlds here are wild, as I said, which means that you can use their resources to fulfill any kind of cost. So even though this system is blue, I could spend this resource to fulfill that red requirement. And you can only spend the resources of systems that you control. So even if you got a ship in someone else's system, you can't just steal their resources. Although there are some factions that have cards or abilities that break that rule. But generally, you have to control the system. And that's one of the major benefits of controlling systems is it lets you use the resource and it lets you build. So then there's also planned effects. They're free, which is great. But the other downside to them, other than being less impactful, is that you have to commit to doing them first. So this is the planning phase, and believe it or not, this is when you'll plan cards. So you're going to take any number of cards that you want to do the free planned effect of, and you'll put them face down in front of you in your play area. That means that they're planned, and since every game you're going to start with 3 systems, therefore 3 resources, it's usually a great plan to plan 2 cards and keep 3 in your hand to do actions with. Opportunity or versatile actions with, that is. So once everyone has planned, let's say, forget purple. Once everyone's planned, you're ready to go into the action phase. So starting in player order and proceeding clockwise, you're going to take 1 action on your turn and then it moves to the next player. Now there's 3 types of actions you can take. So the first one is, I'll describe taking a planned action. And what you'll do is you'll flip a card you have face down in front of you and do what it says in the planned section. So I guess I'll explain. This faction, as I said, they're very mobile. They have a lot of cards that give them lots of movement. But whenever a faction or an opponent takes control of a system from you, you get a spite token in that system, which, again, as I said, you can really spend for some serious retribution. And what that means essentially is these are all neutral systems. Nobody controls them. So purple taking control of a neutral system does nothing for my power. But let's say if I had this system exposed here and purple moved their dreadnought in, that would take control of it from me. And because of my race, I would get a spite token. Oh, and I'll explain here. These tokens here are special player markers. Essentially, they have no inherent rules other than what your specific faction gives to them. So in the case of my faction, it's very simply spite tokens. And so it goes in the system, and various cards will have effect that let me spend them to do something in that system. So with that explained, so doing this planned effect here lets me do one of the following. Remove a spite token from a system I control to resolve a production in it, place a spite token in an opposing system which does not contain one, or place 2 fighters in a neutral system. So this is a really good card here because it's got a lot of versatility to it. It lets you put spite tokens down without having to lose control of system. It also lets you build for free as long as you have a spite token in a system. And crucially, I guess I'll explain it when I explain the rules of production, but you can only produce in systems you control. So this, you'd have to have lost a system and then take control back from it, and then you could use this top effect here. And then placing 2 fighters in a neutral system is going to lose effectiveness as the game goes on and more systems become controlled, because there's very few ways for a system to become neutral. But not only is this placing new ships on the board, either 2 fighters or 1 cruiser, because it's 2 power. Oh, never mind, it's just 2 fighters. But it also lets you gain control of a system without needing to move to it. So it could be any strategic location that you might find. So you could put it close to their systems, or especially one that they've left unoccupied, and now you can threaten to steal it right from out of under their noses. And once you have ships in a system, you get to take control of it. So this is a good card. And then any card that doesn't have the keyword persistent at the start of the ability, it's going to get immediately discarded. So that's a planned action. Flip something in your play area, do what it says, and then discard it. Unless, in the case of this one, it's persistent. As you can see here, it starts with the word persistent. And this one is, whenever any of your ships is destroyed, place it on this card, and then at the end of the combat phase, I place one spite token in any system which does not already contain one for every 3 power worth of ships on this card. So let's say over the course of some battles, I had, a cruiser and a dreadnought and a fighter destroyed. That is 4 plus 2 plus 1. So that's 7 power worth of ships, which means I would get 2 spite tokens to place wherever I like, other than one that already contains one. So that's a great way to generate some spite to be able to spend later on. And doesn't involve losing controls of systems necessarily. As long as you lose ships, you'll be getting some spite generation. And then at the end of every turn, these persistent cards will get discarded. But we'll leave that out here for now. The second type of action is an opportunity action. So what you'll do is you'll place specifically a card from your hand out in front of you. You'll pay the cost that is on the right there. So that is 1 military resource, so I'll spend that. And then you just do what it says in the opportunity section. So this is resolve 2 movement, and each time I move ships into a system with a spite token, I may remove it and resolve another movement. So what you may ask is movement? Well, it's really simple. For each movement you're going to resolve, you will choose a system you've got ships in and move any number of them to an adjacent system along the hyperlane connections. So, like that. Anytime you have ships in a system that doesn't contain anyone else's ships, you will gain control of it. Whether it's neutral or not, if it's empty and you now have ships in there, you gain control. And this even includes some instances where you have ships with an opponent and they're able to get those ships to leave. Or, of course, if you destroy them, that also, you're now alone in a system you don't control, so you take it. Now, with movement, they're all completely separate. So there's no rules about a ship not being able to move twice in the same turn. I could do this, and then with my second movement, do this. That is legal. And it could be any of the ships, so I could do only move 1 from each, like so. And that's why these fighters are great here, because I can branch them out off all these paths. And even though it's only 1 fighter, it's not a major deterrent. Just because I have 1 single ship in there, it means that no matter how many ships purple sends over to fight me, I will still retain control of the system, which means if it had resources in it, I could still spend them before, my ship got blown up and I lose the system. And I could still build there, because you can only build in systems that you control. And then once I'm done, oh, and the great part about this is that, not that card, this card, those spite tokens, you can use them to kind of slingshot yourself around and get a lot of unpredictable movement and get into somewhere that your opponent thought you couldn't. Like, for example, let's say, this area is all clear, I don't control this, so my opponent is going to move these ships in here to form a stronger barrier against me and, not worry about losing their homeworld. Well, let's say somehow I had accrued some spite tokens all along here. This card would let me zoom all the way along here and take control of this, because most cards don't give you more than 2 movements for a single action. So generally, 2 systems away is kind of the limit of your potential movement. But with this, that's a surprising amount of movement. That's a crazy play, and it could very well be game-winning, especially if there's still a resource on it, and especially because it's purple's homeworld, which would come with an affinity. So that's movement. And the last thing to take note of is there is ship pinning. So opponents' ships will restrict your ability to move. And that is based on power. So the way to think of it is you cannot, let's say we have this, you cannot move ships out of a system if it would bring your total power worth of ships lower than your opponent's. So in this case, we each have 4 here. I couldn't leave. I couldn't move out of Malobu here. But let's say I moved a fighter in here. Now, I still can't move the Dreadnought out because that would bring it down to a 4v1. But I could move the fighter out because that brings it to a 4v4, so that's legal. So these ships pin each other and then the fighter can just slip through unnoticed. And that could be really important because it's a big investment to have ships on every single one of your systems just to make sure they can't be taken from you. So most often it's really great to be able to have all of your ships on your borders and leave your inner systems more or less undefended. That's a more efficient use of ships. But if your opponent is able to bring in a surprising amount of ships, a huge fleet, they can now slip past you and start taking control of your undefended systems. That's a major thing to keep note of. And one last rule to throw out, y'all. There's a couple cards in the game that let you destroy systems, which currently we're just denoting with a red X. And a destroyed system essentially produces no new resources at the end of turns, and it also costs 2 movements for a ship to leave it. So in addition to any pinning rules that may be taking place, if you want to leave a destroyed system, you have to have 2 movements banked up. So on your turn, if I played this card to be able to move twice, I would have to use both of them to move this ship out of a destroyed system, and then now I've got none left. You know, unless I, of course, had a spike token here to spend to move again. But essentially, that's how destroyed systems work. Only a couple factions bring them into play, but it is a consideration sometimes. It can really limit you, especially if you have a big bulk of your fleet in a destroyed system. That can be a major hindrance. So that's everything there is to know about movement. And the last type of action you can take is a versatile action. So you can just discard your card, not do any of these effects, and it has to specifically be from your hand. So planned cards, you can't discard those. Those have to be played for their planned effect. And these versatile actions here are very simply the things you would most likely want to be doing on any given turn, which is resolve production to build ships, or resolve movement to, as I described, move them around. How does production work? Also very simple. What you'll do is you'll pick a system that you control. First of all, you'll spend the tech. And most abilities that let you resolve production will always require tech. That's kind of how you limit the ability for a faction to just doom stack a bunch of ships somewhere and be completely unbeatable, you know, no matter how cunning you are. So you will pick any system. It doesn't have to be tech. It just has to be the tech resource that you spend. And depending on the type of system, you can build these sets of ships. So if you build in a technology system, you can build 2 cruisers or 1 dreadnought. If you produce in a military system, you can get 4 fighters or 1 dreadnought. Or if you produce in a culture system, you can get 2 fighters and a cruiser, which is an interesting thing because it gives you fleet diversity with only 1 production. Or you could get 2 cruisers. Now you'll note that each of these production possibilities are all worth 4 power. So that's kind of the benchmark. 1 production worth is always 4 power, and there's no niche cases where it's like, oh, this specific on a culture world you get 5 power. No, there's something like that. It's all even across the board. And as I said, you can only produce in systems you control, which is, again, a great reason why even having a single ship in a system can be very important sometimes, just to make sure that you retain control of it, even if an opponent sends in a huge fleet of ships to come fight you, because now I'm still able to produce here. And that works the opposite way. When you go and mount a big attack on your opponent, you're locked in. Those are the ships that you'll have, unless you're able to move more in from somewhere else. But your opponent can always build more as long as they have the technology to be able to resolve production. So that's how that works. Essentially, you will continue taking turns, flipping planned cards, playing from your hand until you either pass, you don't want to take any more actions, because either you don't want to play a card or you just don't have the resources to play a card, which can be a huge thing. Uh, if, for example, your opponent's last resource is on an undefended system and you're able to sneak in and steal it, and they were counting on that last resource to take their last turn, and now you just get a free turn and they can't respond to it, can be a major power swing, and you could even just win the game right off of that. But once all players don't want to or cannot take another action, you pass, and now you start resolving combat, which is always an exciting part of any game. And how that works is at the end of the action phase in any system that you have conflicting ships, you will resolve combat. And let's get some cruisers in here for good measure. Okay. So what you'll do is in player order, first player will choose which system they want to resolve a combat in. And then once that's done, it'll move to the next person. And if there's multiple combats, they'll decide where they want to fight. And it doesn't even have to be a combat they're involved in. So if you got 3 players, the first person could choose to say, okay, you two fight it out over that system. And for various reasons, that might have an important consequence based on the cards they have or the factions in play. But at a basic level, it doesn't, because you can't resolve movement after combats are over. So what you'll do is the players involved will grab the strategy cards for the ship classes they have in play. So for me as orange, I would get all 3. So you can see here there's cruisers, there's dreadnoughts, and there's fighters. And for my opponent purple, they would only get the cruiser and dreadnought cards. And then what you'll do is you'll play these cards face down in front of you in an order left to right. So that'll be the order that your ships engage in. So they'll shoot at each other and also take hits from whatever card your opponent chose. So this is where advantage comes into play. So let's say I just do this and my opponent does this. What we do is one at a time, we'll flip a card, and these ships will fight at each other and possibly gain advantage. So let's say I had actually played them in this order. I flip this card. I have advantage on my opponent because dreadnoughts are good against cruisers, and you can see it broken down here. So what we'll do is we'll gather our dice based on our power. So dreadnoughts are 4 power, cruisers are each worth 2, so we're each rolling 4 dice here. And then we'll just roll our dice and see how many hits we get. Oof. So at a basic level, 5s and 6s will always score a hit. So these 2 here are guaranteed hits for purple. This one here is a guaranteed hit for me. If you have advantage, though, you can also get a hit on a 4. So let's say I had also rolled these as 4s. Without advantage, I would have only gotten 1 hit. But because of these 4s here, and I do have advantage, now I'm getting 3 to purple's 2. And then you'll just assign damage accordingly. So you got 2 hits against me, so I'll assign 2 hits to my dreadnought. They can take 4 hits, so they're just damage tokens for now. But the cruisers only have 2 power each, and I got 3 hits against them, so it's going to destroy one of them outright and put a damage on the remaining one. And then what we'll do is we'll just flip our next card. Oh, in this case, purple's got advantage on me, so that'll be 4 against 4, same kind of deal. So we'll roll again. And would you look at that? Purple got 1 hit against me, and I got 1 hit against them, but I got a 4 here, and because I no longer have advantage, that's not a hit. So I will put 1 damage on the purple dreadnought here, and 1 damage on my orange cruiser. And then flip again, and wouldn't you know, purple has no more cards to flip, which means that I'm going to fire on purple, but purple doesn't fire back against me. I've got 4 fighters, so that's 4 power, so I'll roll. And because there's no card opposing me, I don't get advantage, but of course, I don't have to worry about getting shot back in retaliation. That's 2 hits. And whenever you have hits that you don't know which ship class to assign them to, so let's say I had a bunch more fighters and I had the ability to roll more hits than my opponent's class could sustain. So let's say, they only had a dreadnought showing and I rolled 5 hits. That's called overkill. It also comes into play when you're firing at them and they don't have a card to play. That's also overkill. And what happens in the case of overkill is the opponent chooses which class of ships they want to assign those hits to. So let's just bring it back to the 4 here. So I have rolled 2 hits, and my opponent chooses where those 2 are going to go. Because putting them on the cruisers would kill this cruiser outright, they might not want to put it on there. They might want to put it on the dreadnought. But also, if they apply it to the cruiser, it's doubly worse because only 1 hit can go on the cruiser, which means that that'll be double overkill, and that 1 remaining hit is going to have to go onto the dreadnought anyways. So they'll probably put those 2 damage counters on the dreadnought and keep their cruiser alive. Then what'll happen is everyone reclaims their cards. You see if there's any ship classes that are no longer present in the battle and put those cards aside, and then you'll lay them out again, left to right, and keep going. So each time you lay cards out, that is a whole round. And anytime you flip a card and you roll dice, that's called a volley. So some cards may have effects in combat during a whole round. Maybe you get extra rerolls. Some may only apply during a single volley. Now, you'll notice that we each only have 8 dice, but we could have way more than 8 power worth in a single class of ships. So let's say I have 3 dreadnoughts here. I wouldn't roll 3 times 4, 12 dice. Instead, I would roll up to 8, and any extra power is going to count as rerolls. So in this case, it would be 8 dice with 4 rerolls. And the rerolls you'll use to reroll any missed die once. So I have 4 rerolls in this case. I missed 5 shots here, so I could reroll 1, 2, 3, 4 of these. And critically, you can only reroll a die once. So if you have more rerolls than you do misses, you're wasting rerolls, unfortunately. And if you reroll a die and you don't hit, you don't get to reroll it again if you have more to spare. So that's how that works. Then once combat is done, let's say I wiped out purple because I've got way more ships. You will see if there is a change of hands required, which there is, because I'm now alone here in Malobu. So I take control of it. And then once all the combats have been resolved, you're going to go to the cleanup phase. So you'll discard any action cards that are in the play area. So those would go to the discard. If you have face down action cards, you can pull them back to your hand or discard them. And then any that you still have in your hand, if you passed early or you didn't have the resources to play them, you can keep or discard. And then you will remove all damage from ships that weren't destroyed. So these ships get repaired. And finally, you're going to, again, refresh all non-neutral systems. So any that are controlled. They don't have to have a ship in them. They just have to have a control marker in them. So you'll get new resources to spend on your next turn, and so on and so forth. Now, critically, on the first turn, you cannot win. But on the subsequent turns, after you do combat, before any cleanup, you will check everyone's future to see if they've completed their objective. And if they have, that person will win. If multiple players have completed objectives, the higher priority, closer to 0, will win. So it's funny here, I actually have the lowest priority future in the game, which means this is actually the easiest one to do because it's kind of just what'll happen through normal gameplay. You'll eventually start taking control of systems, and they'll probably all be adjacent to each other, and you'll eventually get to 8. Not too hard to do. and also pretty difficult to prevent because there's no specific systems that you have to fight over. It's just I have to get them below 8 or I have to break a chain. Many future cards will, where's the deck? Many futures will involve controlling specific systems, and in those cases, those systems will be hollow on the minimap. So this one is Tekdagos and Mykeb, so that is control this system and this system. And in the case of trying to prevent a player from winning, those are the two ones you're going to have to specifically target and for them protect. You'll see this one's cool. This one is you have to control 4 of these systems all in this line that are connected to each other. So, for example, it's this, I call it the highway because it's a big line. You could imagine it was some big trade route back in the day. But this objective would be to control 4 systems that are all connected to each other. So this would count, these 2 and these 2 wouldn't count. They'd all be in a line. And that's sort of the thing. When you start playing and you reveal your Chronos cards, it's always important to read over everyone's future objective, make sure everyone's aware of what they have to do themselves, but also have to prevent other people from doing. And I think, it's common courtesy to announce when you are completing your objective and that our players need to stop you before the turn ends, otherwise you will win. And it's also really interesting to have a case where you've got your objective completed, no issues, but your opponent's objective is harder than yours, and they're either completing it currently or they have a decent chance of doing it this turn. And so you don't just have to protect your own win condition, you also have to stop them from completing theirs. So you can get in some really interesting cases like that, especially when you got 3-player games and it's like, we got to dogpile the obvious winning player here, but at the same time, they're also, third parties also kind of trying to complete their objectives. So they stop the winning player, but they also win anyways because they've got their objective. A lot of funky shenanigans that can happen. And after that, you basically go back to the planning phase, if nobody's winning, of course, and you start all over again. So you'll draw, usually you'll have an empty hand because it's always good to play all 5 cards. You'll draw back up to 5, plan the ones you want to do the planned effect of, and then start taking actions one at a time, moving ships around, fighting in battle, so on and so forth. And there you go. That's basically it. That's how you play Solipsis. So the game usually runs between, I want to say, 60 and 90 minutes. If you're really familiar with the game, I think you can bang these out really quickly. Especially 2 players, it's probably like 30 to 40 minutes, especially if you say, okay, I think you can win here and I can't stop you, so I'll just concede. But yeah, it's pretty quick and it's pretty simple. The rules aren't too crazy. This took, let's see, this took 43 minutes just because I wanted to give a very in-depth overview of everything. But I think if you're just sitting down for the first time and you're teaching someone how to play, it's pretty easy to just explain things as they come up, because a lot of the nuance in the game comes from these faction or race abilities and these abilities on the cards. That's where all the really nitty-gritty stuff comes into play, because these 2 default versatile actions are very simple. It's just move twice or produce once. Nothing too crazy. And those are kind of the pillars I designed around. I wanted it to be quick to teach, quick to play, and a neat bonus is that it's quick to set up because you start the game with an empty board and you place things during setup of your choice, and it's only 3 systems to take control of, only a couple ships that you have to place. Very quick to set up, and it's also pretty fun, I think. So that's going to do it for now. Again, if you want to play this, definitely let me know. I'm always open to having new people join the team. But yeah, that's going to do it for now. Keep an eye out for a gameplay video I'm going to be posting maybe later today or tomorrow with the other designer who helped me a lot on this game. And that was a pretty interesting 1.5 games we got to play. So until then, I'll catch you all later. Peace.